The topic of today's talk is One Nation, Many Realities. This is an issue which many of us have been reading about, thinking about the differences between different parts of the country, not just in terms of, in respect to this delimitation issue, but generally levels of development, levels of welfare, etc. So Deepa has some very interesting things to say, which are different, I think, from what we commonly understand. Deepa herself, if you didn't know, she is currently a visiting professor at the Azim Premji University. She is an economist by training, a development economist, who taught for many years at the Ambedkar University in Delhi. Her interests are on welfare. She was actively involved with the Right to Food campaign and even worked with the Supreme Court in the 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. So she has traveled widely in the field. So she has very much both hands-on experience as well as an academic understanding of the diversity within India. So Deepa, on One Nation, Many Realities.
So what I thought I'll talk to you about today is, like Ram said, about the diversities within India, particularly regional. There's, of course, so many realities, not just regional variations, but gender, caste, age, all kinds of levels of development. So one way in which India is very diverse is also the regional diversity. There are many nations within this nation that we belong to. And also want to say that it's not a north versus south talk that I'm trying to give, although it might come across like that at times. I might be making some simplistic comparisons, but it is not that simple. We do know that it is a very diverse country, and the north-south is not really so clearly divided by what comes in south and what comes in north. And there is a Bihar in Telangana, there is a Telangana in Bihar, if you know what I mean, and I'll try and talk about that a little bit more. Of course, it's also very topical, but I got into this issue not because of the delimitation debate or the issue of finance commission transfers to the states, but in fact, this is something that I got into about 15 years back, or even longer now, almost 20 years back, when I was looking at what I should do as for my PhD research. And when I started my PhD, I had already worked a little bit in Telangana on maternal and child health with Dr. Evita, Dr. Pramod, who are here, where learned how community and these diversities actually play a role in even understanding something very medical and clinical, like infant mortality or health during pregnancy and so on. I had some exposure to the north because I studied in Delhi and did some fieldwork around the north as well. And that contrast was quite glaring. And with the Right to Food campaign and the Supreme Court Commission, that's something that one wanted to understand better. And when I started thinking of this as a topic, there were many people, particularly in the South, who said, what is there to compare? It's not comparable. So my PhD research I did in Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. And in Tamil Nadu, a lot of people I met would say it's a different country. Like, how can you compare UP to us? We are different. Before that, this was not part of the PhD research, but we had gone to Kerala, I think it was in 2000, to understand the people's plan there, process. And Kerala, of course, is known for its model of development. And a lot of people in Kerala also said, we are a different country, you can't do this anywhere else. And that was a puzzle that kind of stuck with me, saying, how could that be? You know, after all, we are one country, we are governed by the same constitution, all of us vote for the same central government. How can we just give up on this, saying it's just two different worlds and you can't be the same? And so that's where kind of my motivation for it came. Of course, I moved away from it, but when they asked me to think of a topic for Manthan, I thought this was a good time for me to also come back to this issue. Also because a few months back, this was really the burning issue, and it will keep coming back, I think, every few months now, beginning from Stalin and Chandrababu Naidu saying their people should have more children now. Their people meaning their women, of course. The same people who 30 years back said the women should not have children. So how these things change, and how therefore it is very political, that all of this because they feel that they're getting fewer grants because of lower population. There was another interesting interview I heard where Revanth Reddy was being asked about this. So the anchor said, what do you think about this north-south difference? And he said, see, the South is really discriminated against. And the first thing I'll point out is, why do you say north-south difference? Why not south-north difference? So this whole feeling within South India as if we are the ones being wronged because we are being punished by saying that there's less poverty, there's fewer people, so you'll get a smaller share of the central pie, or that in this whole delimitation discussion where there is a fear that we might lose the number of seats in the national parliament. But like I said, I'm not speaking about these two things at all. So I thought this was a good context for us to try and understand what is this difference. Just simply, what are the ways in which, at a macro, from an economic perspective, the states are different. And therefore, while doing that, I am being quite simplistic, and I do talk about north-south. But when I'm saying north-south, I mainly mean Kerala, Tamil Nadu, a little bit of Telangana, Andhra, Karnataka. North is, of course, not the rest of the country, but broadly, the other end of the spectrum is the Central Eastern belt, which earlier used to be called the Bimaru belt, which is not a very, it's not a politically correct term to be using for those states, but largely undivided Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Odisha, and there is a lot of variation happening within those states also now. So before I move on, once again want to say that acknowledging the diversity and differences within these states as well, among those states as well, but just for simplicity to say, to make a point on what I'm talking about. So is there a real difference? What is the difference? The first difference, which is quite visible and I think everybody is familiar about, is just in terms of economic prosperity, in terms of income levels, in terms of consumption expenditure and so on. So if you look at data from the economic survey, for example, states like Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and even Haryana in the north or Gujarat, have a per capita income of over 2.5 lakhs, which is not very much. 2.5 lakhs is 20,000 a month. But on the other end, Bihar, Jharkhand, and Uttar Pradesh have a per capita income of less than 1 lakh, which is less than 10,000 rupees a month per person. This is the per capita income. Of course, it's not evenly distributed either there or here. There would be many living below this amount and many much, much above this amount. But particularly when it comes to these kind of economic indicators, I think what is interesting is that it was not always like this. You know, that is one misconception, that it was always like this, that the South was always more prosperous. But when we look at the data, that's not entirely true, and I'll come back to that. And this kind of difference is seen in many different indicators in terms of wealth assets and so on. But where it's also quite stark is in what we call human development outcomes, on which I think focus is much less than it should be. For example, the life expectancy, which tells you the average age a person is expected to live if they're born in, say, 2025, how long can we expect them to live for? I think this data is for 2021. So in Kerala, the life expectancy is over 75 years. In Uttar Pradesh, it's around 65 years, which means just by the accident of birth, if a child is born in Uttar Pradesh, that child is expected to live for 10 years less than a child who's born on the same day in Kerala. So that is kind of, and 10 years is quite a big difference. And of course, then quality of life would be different as well. Further, if you look at the female advantage in life expectancy, so normally you see that women live longer than men because of various reasons. Even this is reversed in, so in Bihar, even now, the female life expectancy is about a year or two less than the male life expectancy. But the female life expectancy in Kerala is 5 years more than the average male life expectancy. Literacy rate, Kerala is about 95%, Bihar is around 60%. Fertility rate, which gives you the average number of children a woman has, Bihar is still around 3, whereas Telangana, Andhra, Kerala, Tamil Nadu are all below 2, which is below the replacement level, which means that the population actually, in absolute numbers, will fall. Infant and child mortality, again, I'm not showing you the figures, but of course it is, there is this divergence in that as well. But Kerala, for example, the under 5 mortality rate, which is 6.3 per thousand, which is the number of children per thousand births who die before they reach the age of 5, is 6.3 in Kerala, which is a little less than the average for the United States of America. That's where Kerala is. On the other hand, if we look at Tamil Nadu, it's around countries like Indonesia or Venezuela, which is high middle income. Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are around the same levels of Afghanistan, Sudan, Burundi. So if you just look at not the Indian average infant mortality rate or under 5 mortality rate, which are considered very sensitive indicators, not just on how many children are dying, but how well society is doing in taking care of its people, then within India, we have everything ranging from America to Burundi. That's what we are, and that is what we need to, again, sort of understand. And this gap, another way of looking at it, is if we look at, say, the infant and child mortality in Tamil Nadu in the year 2005-06, that's 20 years back, it was around 30. The infant mortality in Bihar in 2019-21, which is the latest period for which we have the data, is still 46. So 30, 20 years back, 46 today. So Bihar today, at least on this metric, has still not reached where Tamil Nadu reached 20 years back. And I make these comparisons with Tamil Nadu because Kerala, of course, did this even earlier, and Kerala is almost seen as, it has a very different, unique history, and everybody feels it's not achievable. But Tamil Nadu is in some ways closer home and something that seems like one can still relate to. Many, many such indicators. I won't reel out more numbers, but any indices that you see now, that even the official data that the government brings out, be it in relation to human development outcomes, be it in relation to infrastructure, be it in relation to quality of healthcare services, of education services, in all of this, you broadly see this kind of ranking, where you see Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Pondicherry, Goa on top, and you see Bihar, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh in the bottom. And in the middle, there is some fluidity and things move up and down. So why is this happening is what I wanted to talk about today. There's, of course, a lot of reasons, and the obvious one that everybody will think about is, of course, the South is richer. That's what I started with as well, that the per capita incomes in the South are much higher. But I think that needs to be investigated a little bit further. Was the South always richer? Could we ask the question if this better human development is what made the South richer? You know, this relationship between economic growth and incomes and human development outcomes is both ways. You could have higher incomes because you have better human capital. That's people are more educated, more healthy, and therefore you have better productivity and higher incomes. Higher incomes also contribute to better health and better education and better living standards, to increased incomes for the households, as well as greater capacity of governments to be able to spend. And I think we usually miss the other direction of human development contributing to growth and income. And so can we look at that also here? Did that play a role? What came first in these states? Of course, these kind of things are quite difficult to establish because often they happen simultaneously. But there's some simple numbers, again, that we can look at, which kind of gives weight to my argument that what came first was actually investment in human capital. Some of it, a large part of it, I would say, post-independence in states other than Kerala. Kerala, much of it also began pre-independence in terms of investments in human development and education and health and so on. Why did they do it, of course, will be a question that I'll come later to. So if we look at economic conditions, it's quite interesting that there's a paper by somebody called Martin Revellion who works on poverty, who had a paper in the early 90s which looked at how poverty changed from the 1960s onwards, and he's trying to look at which are the states where poverty reduced faster and what are the reasons they did so. But the interesting thing in that paper is this table, which puts Tamil Nadu right up there as the state with the second highest level of poverty in India in 1960. So poverty in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, poverty measured as consumption expenditure in economic terms, was amongst the highest amongst Indian states. In Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, in Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, above Odisha, Uttar Pradesh in 1960. But by 1990, the story sort of changed. And I think after 1990, with the liberalization and so on, these were the states which were able to take the advantages of liberalization because of everything else that happened. If you look at average, for instance, per capita incomes that I talked about just now, even there, not very much difference between these states till the 60s, 70s. From the 80s, you see a divergence coming between them. So economic factors are not really so obviously answering the reason for this divergence, and we need to go digging for other reasons. Because if you look at the other things I talked about in terms of education, health, and so on, by the 80s, 90s, you see a huge difference, even in the 70s, amongst these states. So these states saw the fertility transition happening first, they saw education coming first, they saw improved health coming first, and it's the impact of all that that we're seeing today, that the population growth in these states are lower and that they're better educated, there's greater industrialization, and so on. So what then? What do we look at? So there are two things that I want to talk about that we should, I think, three things that we should talk about, and which is what I found in my research, and there are a lot of other people working on this who talk about this as well. One is the role of women. Once again, I won't go into very much details on why it is different, but I will, how women's status impacts these outcomes, both economic as well as human development. The second, also interestingly, is the role of backward class and caste mobilization in these states that I'm seeing. So both of these together basically look at how social equality or inequality affects public action in a state. And also the third, not very popular, because again, we tend to think that governments are useless and are completely, one can't achieve anything through the government and everything needs to be privatized, but it's really the role of public services as well. All of this is being changed, is being challenged even in the southern states today. So it's not as if there's a stark black and white story, but if we try to make a black and white story out of this, it's broadly these things that get into it. The literature looks at a lot of historical reasons, which I'm not getting into here. They do have some significance, but I feel that we tend to give them greater weight than we can afford to, let me say. Things like the British land tenure system. Yes, it was different. Many of these states which are most backward had the permanent land settlement, the zamindari system, whereas the other areas had a different, less exploitative land tenure system. Some economists have looked at just the difference between rice cultivation and wheat cultivation. That rice cultivating areas are areas where you need more women's labor to do the sowing, and that brings them outside the house, and that kind of contributed to this kind of social equality. People even go further back to look at how the North was always exposed to more invasions than the South was, and that sort of contributed to very different gender norms emerging in the North than in the South. So without kind of undermining any of these arguments, while I think that there is some truth in all of this, I also think from a moral, ethical point of view, we need to look for more contemporary reasons as well, because they are defeatist after a point. Because if we keep going back to invasions, to the British land tenure system, we can't change that, and we can't change anything then. And the gap is sort of widening. So what is it that we can look at in terms of the post-independence histories of what these states did? And is there anything that other states can learn? And I think there are lessons for even the southern states from their own past, because they're also moving away from what they did at various points. So the first point I want to make is that public services work. So a bit of a propaganda that I'm doing here on my part as well, that despite whatever we think that the government is most inefficient and useless and so on, they do work and they contribute to changing people's lives. That's all that is available for the poor. Let's not look at this only from the lens of the middle classes who have abandoned the public services because we can afford other things. I was in Vikarabad and Suryapet the last 3 days, and I've done field work in Telangana after a gap of almost, I think, over 10 years. But I go to the north, to all the other states I mentioned quite often. And before I went, by people who took me there, by people at home, I was told how horrible things are in Telangana now. Schools are not functioning. things are not going on and it's people are not getting what they should. I thought it was a different world. I met girls who have done sericulture as a subject in their intermediate. For me, that's an impossible thing to find in, say, UP. Intermediate education here has hostels, has residential schools where they actually have labs. You know, it might seem like this is really basic, and it is really basic. The children here deserve much more than what they're getting. But coming straight from Gujarat, from a tribal area there, for me, an intermediate college having a lab was like a big story. Because I came from a place where people who completed their graduation were not able to name the subjects in which they wrote their exams. To somewhere where you had these young girls saying, oh, I did BPC because I want to be a nurse. I did MPC because somebody told me I'm good at maths. This was greatly refreshing. And again, I'm saying that, see, these tiny things, it's also unfortunate for people in Telangana that even this is something like great. For somebody coming from outside, they do deserve much more, but there is still a difference. The public services work, that makes a big difference. The fact that children are able to complete class 10 in huge parts of Telangana, even where there is no MV foundation, has to do with the fact also that most villages, or at least most panchayats in Telangana, today have a high school. They don't have to go out very far. They can walk to their high school. They can take a cycle. In states where this is not happening, they're still not able to do that. So, and there is no alternative there, and the private schools are not really great. There are all kinds of things happening. Now there's a whole new private sector coming up because of this demand. But if we look at where is this coming from, and 15 years back, that was the story in Tamil Nadu as well, that in the remotest village one went to, there was a school was open, teacher would be there was a health center had a toilet for a single woman doing field work in Tamil Nadu, was not a very odd thing. People didn't ask me, what are you doing here? They thought I was doing my work and they were quite happy with it to answer my questions. Many of them understood. Many of the women who were my respondents also said, oh, I get what you're doing. You're looking at women's empowerment. I was like, yes, thank you very much. It, again, not to kind of caricature it, but fieldwork in UP was very different 15 years back. It has changed over time. There was no public transport. Everyone said, what are you doing here alone? Are you married? Do you have children? Why are you not wearing bangles if you're married? Why did you leave your child and come to do this? You know, to do PhD here, you really don't have to do fieldwork. We'll tell you who can write it for you. You know, it was a whole different kind of a story. And again, not to caricature it, because this is 15 years back, things are changing in the north as well. So if we look at government policies in Tamil Nadu, what did they do? One clear thing that stands out is that investments came earlier. They did not wait for growth to happen to invest, particularly in education and education of girls. So things which seem like great innovations now, cycles for girls, midday meals in schools, these were innovations that happened in Tamil Nadu in the 60s. Uniforms in schools, which is now happening here, is something that happened there. So early investments and sustained investments. The data also shows, and I'm not showing too much data, so you have to take my word for this, but I can give you links if anyone wants to explore. But the data also shows things like fewer vacancies in government, better infrastructure, more per capita spending on each of these, and so on. So for example, if you look at the number of government servants, this is more recent data, in Andhra Pradesh, there are, for every, I think it's in thousands, the numbers. So in Andhra Pradesh, there is a total of 1,038,000. That's about, I think, 10 lakhs government servants, center, state, and local bodies included. In Bihar, which is population-wise a slightly bigger state, there are only 3,79,000. So 3 times the number of government servants we have in Andhra Pradesh compared to Bihar. Another way of looking at it, if we look at the number of government servants per 1,000 population, there's 14 in Tamil Nadu, 2.7 in Bihar. So again, it's not a problem of a big government. It's not a problem of the government employees in Bihar having no work and sitting khali and chai peete rehte hain, inko koi kaam nahi hai, we should downsize the government. Not at all. We really need to increase the number of people. A lot of the time we have seen that they're sitting khali and drinking chai because there's just not enough people to do the work there is. They don't know how to do it if there is such few people. Another example, again from here, from MV Foundation's work earlier in the 90s, where they used to say that in class 1, the number of children who finally remain in the class is equal to the size of the classroom. Because then, so every year you would enroll 150 children. In the end, there'd be 40 or 50 who will remain. And the teachers would just push out the remaining because they just couldn't deal with them. There were not enough teachers. I was pleasantly surprised to see yesterday that there were more teachers. I mean, there were so many teachers that they were going out to bring children, wean them away from private English medium, saying that we want children because we want to keep our jobs. So that's the kind of transformation that has happened here. However, in higher education, even here, today, there are huge gaps. So there is a second generation kind of issues that are coming up here. Public services working is not just about the services being there, the infrastructure being there and the people being there, but the people also delivering. So again, they're famous stories, and this is what Amartya Sen and Jean Dresser's thesis has been also, when they say public action contributes to better human development outcomes, where they're talking not just about public action in terms of the state investing and state providing services, but the general public demanding accountability from the state for these services to actually deliver. So one big way in which they give an example of how the public action happens is, of course, through media in a democracy, but also through local mobilization, through the communities who are beneficiaries demanding accountability. A famous story from Kerala, which everybody repeats, and I'll also repeat because I've not done fieldwork in Kerala, is of this doctor in a primary health center. So this woman goes there for delivery. It's a 24-hour primary health center. The doctor's not there. The village community looks, this is S. Guhan who kind of documented this. The village community goes looking for the doctor and finds out he's watching a film in the theater. So actually a group of them go to the movie theater, bring him out and say, she's in labor, come and deliver her. No, just again an example of that. You think this is your right and you're entitled to it. In Tamil Nadu, it was a bit different. They didn't do this kind of thing, but anybody I asked, saying, like when I asked teachers, this is a remote village, how do you care, why do you come? I come from a place where people don't come to school. Usually the answer would be that, you know, these people are very aware, and there is this phone number. They'll pick up and they'll call somebody. They'll call a politician or they'll call some higher official. So we better come. This is our job, we have to do it. So at least that level of accountability exists, in contrast to areas where the government servants are like bosses and do not really respond to the community in that manner. But different issues become issues in which the government gives accountability in different states, of course. So Tamil Nadu, a lot around food and welfare, around food politics, some people have, we have seen. So public distribution system, when the World Bank came and when it became targeted across the country, this one state continues to do a universal public distribution system. There was another story that I heard from government officials when I was doing field work, was in 96, when healthcare was being privatized in various places and user charges were being introduced, that they did it in Tamil Nadu, and then Jayalalitha somehow had this feeling that this was going against her. So she got a survey done which said that this was not popular, and she reversed all the user charges and then decided to improve the primary health centers. Something people might relate to here, when we started this health work in Aluru in Rangareddy district, we had a team from the Fernandez Hospital to come help us with the antenatal care. And the first day they came, their team pointed out, and then we realized the issue really was that there was no curtain in that examination room in the PHC, where pregnant women are being examined. So the team from there said, how can we examine women here? And then we figured that was why women were not coming there at all in the first place. And it was a simple thing, a curtain. So we just had to go talk to the sarpanch and say, please get a curtain put here. This I was able to link when I went to Tamil Nadu a few years later, when I saw one of the first things they did towards improving their primary health centers was to paint these primary health center buildings in bright colors. So when you were going in the bus, you would see this orange building and yellow building and blue building with a little garden, and they were all PHCs. They were places where you were respected, where you could go and there was dignity. It was not because you're poor, You could be in an examination room without a curtain and the whole village can see you. It's things like this come out when one is accountable, when you really care also, and that you see in these different states and different things. So what are some of the features from public services in Tamil Nadu that I think we can definitely learn why it works? While I say this, also saying that it's not a state without corruption. It's not as if it's a state where people are all born pure-hearted and they're just nice, lovely Tamilians who do this, not at all. In fact, most of the officers who are putting in place these reforms are North Indians. Because a lot of IAS cadre that comes to Tamil Nadu, when I was working, the health secretary was the Sardarji who spoke in Tamil brilliantly. And really, but the political system was such that he had to deliver. For example, Jayalalitha used to have this video conference with district collectors once in 3 months, only on the midday meals in schools. She would call up each one and say, how is midday meal doing? Are they getting food every day? Are children getting eggs? And then she would look at this register where complaints came to say, Phalana district, complaints are coming, what is going on? You know, just that little thing of the chief minister is interested in the midday meal was enough to keep the midday meal going through the year. So many such examples. So one thing that clearly came out, and again, not a very popular opinion these days, is that universal and free services work. Not just that public services work, but when public services are universal, they provide a certain quality, everyone has a stake in the system, and there is a merit for them to being free. So PDS, health, education, nutrition, and Tamil Nadu are examples. Second is that when the administration itself is democratized, again, highly unequal society, very casteist, but when you look at these basic public services, you look at the proportion of people from SC and OBC communities in government teachers, in nurses, in government doctors and so on, much higher in Tamil Nadu than in any other states. This is of course also an outcome of the whole social reform movement that the state went through from the 20s onwards, but it's not as if the movement created this. There were systems and institutions that had to be put in place for this to happen. For example, again, in recruitments, which is why they are opposing the NEET so much. In medical seats, they gave preference to students who studied in government schools in rural areas. The idea behind that again being that these will be people willing to go back and work in rural areas. So it was not forcing people to do compulsory rural placements, but including people from those backgrounds within all these services so that they naturally were prone to go back there. In PG seats, you had a kind of preference if you had done 3 years or 5 years in the PHC as a doctor. So many such innovations, a lot of monitoring, efficiency, a lot of things. If we look at each program, I can give you examples. But all of this, the question then for me was, why does it happen? Why is this Sardarji friend in Tamil Nadu wanting to run the system? And why is it not happening? A lot of, again, coincidence, a lot of the IS officers in Bihar were Tamilian. And why were they not as interested? It's not like they're less capable. And I think that's where this very elusive one word that we use, political will, comes into play. That it's not only about how well bureaucrats are trained, but it's also about what are the political incentives that's making them do certain things or not. And I do think in the last 10 years, things have changed much more, but generally. So where does that political will come from was obviously the next question. How do these things become electoral political issues? Why is it that in Andhra also, N.T. Ramarao's 2 rupees kg rice scheme, why did something like that become a political slogan here? Why did health insurance in Arogyashri become a slogan later? Why was YSR contesting elections on social welfare pensions? How do these issues become political issues? We might think of them as doles, as waste. I don't. Again, something we can talk about later. But the question was, how do these things become political? And it's only when they become political that they begin to function. So why does the politics happen the way it is? That is a more difficult question to answer. Of course, there is the public action, as I discussed by Dres and Sen, where it's not just government action, but that people demand it. But then why do people demand it? Why do people in some states demand some things and not in others? In Kerala, the literature talks a lot about the left movements, about Narayana Guru. There is this little Narayana Guru statue in most of the villages we went to. backward caste leader who propagated education. Tamil Nadu, of course, Periyar and so on. So I'm not talking about that so much. I think additionally, what also determines the politics of this, of any place, is how equal or unequal society is. And that also doesn't happen by accident, which I'll come to later. And there, when I say equal, unequal, it's not just wealth inequality or income inequality, but even in terms of gender and caste and so on, where the hierarchies are very sharp, it is really the issues of the elite alone that become issues for everybody. But when those are kind of blurred a little bit, then there are many issues that become political issues, and I'll try and illustrate that through women's status. So women's status, of course, is often talked about, that teach a mother, you teach the entire family. If the mother is educated, she will know what immunization to give her child. All of that, of course. And a lot of this is within the household, within the family, that a more informed, more educated mother is a better mother. But not just as a mother, but when women are sort of have a space in the public sphere, that also affects, I think, the kind of politics that happens in that place. So and there are people who've studied this. For example, in Tamil Nadu, people have even looked at the kind of roles, say, MGR did in his films, where he was trying to address this women constituency that he had. Or more recently, Nitish Kumar introducing prohibition in Bihar. That when you see women as a constituency, now across the country, many states this is happening, even Modi sees women as a constituency. Not everyone does the same thing. So we have free gas cylinder, we have a lot of things which seem to be addressing women, but they're very different from when you're addressing men. But this pathway of when women are seen as your political constituency, that also affects the kind of issues that become political. And given gender division of labor, that's when health, education, and these public services also kind of become public issues. Who is coming to these public meetings? Who is standing in the line in the ration shop? It makes a very big difference when women are part of this. Like again, in the southern states, it's very common to see women accompanying older people or children to the health center. They don't have to wait for a man to go along with them, and there are things that they see and they demand, which is quite different from where that is not the case. And when we look at this women's status, the difference between these states are much, much starker. So if you write from women's literacy and things, obvious things like that, life expectancy and so on, but even when you look at indicators of autonomy, mobility, so there are questions that surveys ask, things like, can you go alone to the temple in your village? The proportion of women in the southern states who say yes to this is much higher than the proportion of women who say yes to this in the north. That doesn't mean at all that we've achieved gender equality in the south. Because when you look at the intra-household data, so do you get beaten up by your husband? Same, south and north. Did you have to pay dowry? Same. Dowry rates are even higher here. But in indicators which are looking at women's status in the public sphere, you do see that women are more visible, at least. And that sort of plays a role in making public services also happen. I used to have these pictures of political rallies in UP and Tamil Nadu, and in the front you see a lot of women. In Telangana also you see. Even when you do these community meetings, these women are always fighting here. They're always shouting at you. They're always saying, we're too busy, and why are you wasting my time? Because they are very different in the public sphere. They might be getting abused at home, but still have some sort of a relatively better status in the public sphere than they do in some of these more backward states. So it's not just one route which works. In some places, it's backward caste mobilization that works. Because finally, the stake in the system is highest for women and for those who belong to these marginalized communities. Who goes to government schools? It is mostly, over 90% the children in government schools are SC, ST, OBC and girls. Even among these communities, a little bit of upward mobility, they send them to private. Who goes to government hospitals? Again, those who can't afford anything else, and they are voiceless. But if everybody goes, or if they have an equal voice, then they are able to raise questions sort of better. So this greater democratization of the state, having representation even amongst the service providers of people from backward castes and classes, having more women in service provision. So having women teachers, having women doctors, all of this one has seen at the micro level in the village where it works in getting people towards these services and making them better. At the macro level, when you look at the data, you see that this is one big difference between the states, about just how many of people from these communities are in the government. So I think women's status is important, and something that the literature is not, or generally we don't think about enough, is that women's status is not only important in the sense of within the household of her becoming a better mother, but it's also important towards democratizing society overall. So having said all this, it's not as if the South doesn't have any challenges or issues. What I've been talking about so far is things that have worked for the southern states, and also trying, it is, I think, an optimistic story, because it tells us that if you invest, and if you invest in a way which is equitable, it can actually work and give results. But I think what is happening overall, if you look at the trend, particularly over the last 10, 15 years, I would say, is that overall the framework of policy, particularly social policy, is to go away from these kind of models, even in the southern states. So like I said, of course, there is corruption everywhere. I think corruption is more centralized in the better off states. It's more decentralized. So you have big contracts here to make money from, and maybe you're okay with not making money from the supplementary nutrition for children and school textbooks and so on. In the poorer states, there are no big contracts also. So they're making money from this, from children's food. Again, not because they're bad and we are good, but because that's where the opportunity is to make money. That continues, of course. What we also see is kind of a reversal. When I keep talking about women's status, it's a bit worrying that you see the Sanskritization happening in the South as well now in a very peculiar way, maybe through the media. So I see many more women putting sindoor, for example, in rural areas as well, which wasn't there earlier. It was, I mean, they do put a bottu, but not sindoor and black beads was not really so common, clearly maybe coming from Ekta Kapoor or whoever it's coming from. So this whole idea of upward mobility means women cannot go out, they have to sit at home, they have to, you know, we are not in such a bad state that our women have to work, is something that we hear often. So that kind of trend is something that's probably moving in a regressive direction. Inequality, again, is a huge concern. So you see the stark inequality quite a bit. We see it in schooling, even more now, where everybody, with just the idea that English medium is better, private is better, for no reason. So the Telangana government is trying to put English medium in schools, which is not really what they should be doing. Even then, children are not coming back because you just think private is better, because everyone wants to be, I mean, there is an aspiration. You want to emulate those who are rich and successful around you, and I think that's, again, it's a bit worrying, because that would only increase the inequality, not reduce it. A big issue for the South also is the issue of migration and migrant workers, which Kerala started addressing to some extent, but you do see that they're still seen as outsiders. So if I'm making this point that the greater the inequality and the fissures in society, the lesser the human development, then when we have our compatriots from Bihar and UP, if they're always seen as outsiders and backward people, and they're coming and destroying everything around here, I don't know if that is the response that needs to be given. Something that needs to be thought about, needs to be acknowledged, that we need their labor. That is why they're coming here, and they are contributing to economic activity here as well. Managing urbanization, so linked to this identity politics, the way it's developing today, I think it's the link between identity politics and education and health and better public services, which was quite strongly there in, say, the Periyar movement and the social reform movement, is something that we don't see right now, because they're working in silos. We are working in silos. So how do we look at this? And I think it's in this context that we have to think about finance commission, fund sharing, how much funds come here, because are we thinking about it from the point of view of equity, or from just from the point of view of our identity, or as South Indians, our identity as Tamilians, Or what is the most equitable way in which we share resources for better development for all parts of the country? What would it mean if we continue to grow in this way, where a part of, there are like Amartya Sen said, islands of prosperity in something doom that he used in the book. That is what we are seeing today. And within the better off places also you see more and more of that sort of happening. So after my story of optimism, a story of caution, that it's not as if we are continuing in a path which is sustainable even for for the southern states. Just one more story again, because I'm just coming from there. The last 2-3 days, I've been speaking to young women. It was really heartwarming because all of them had dreams. Somebody wanted to open a beauty parlor. Someone wants to be an air hostess. She didn't know what it was called, but she wanted to be this girl who will be in the plane and wear a topi. That was her sort of dream. Many of them wanted to be nurses, they want to be teachers, and this is great to have young women in 18 to 24 age group from first generation literates. Parents are still agricultural laborers. To even be able to think of these things is, I think, for me, a huge, huge success. But there are no opportunities. 90% of these girls are not going to make it because there are no jobs. The kind of development that's happening even in Telangana is not one which is creating decent jobs for anybody, these girls or anybody else. At the same time, every woman I met, Dalit, OBC, poor, slightly better off, landed, landless, everyone was in debt, minimum of 1 lakh and upwards from there. So they seem to be doing well, but I don't know how long this is going to last either. So there are many questions to be asked here as well in what is the direction in which we are going. But the broader economic and policy point that I'm trying to make, and maybe I feel so strongly about this because I come from the economics discipline where this is not seen as a central agenda at all, which is that human development and human capital is important and as important as physical capital. So this whole thing about let's build our roads, let's build our dams, let's do our electricity, and let's do our infrastructure, and then things will come. If we look at the data, if we look at the experience of Indian states, that is not really the only story. It is doing a bit of both, and I would say recognizing that human capital, developing people's capabilities is very much an economic agenda and not just an agenda for social workers and activists. That even to make for economic prosperity, this is something that is really worth investing in. The second point is that this does not happen on its own. It does require policy and state intervention. The forms can be debated. Should the state run schools? Should the state get private institutions to run schools and fund them? Should the state run its own hospital? Should it do a health insurance scheme? These are points that can be debated. I have my views on those. But without any state intervention, leaving it to the market, health education does not happen and will only increase inequities, and there'll be people who'll be left behind. Therefore, it's not that the orientation of economic policy can't only be growth first or growth alone, but it's also the nature of growth and how much is it taking people along and increasing their capabilities. So again, things which are not spoken about enough within economics is values such as justice and equality. How do we evaluate our economic policies from the lens of justice, from the lens of equality, and is it really worth doing it? And I think this is something that is, I mean, it's imperative that we do it. Sometimes it feels like our whole country is a ticking time bomb. Something will explode with the kinds of inequalities that are increasing everywhere. So how do we move from them being inequities to it being a diversity that we celebrate? Not to say, therefore, that everybody becomes the same and looks alike and wears the same clothes and speaks the same language, but how does everyone expand their capabilities, and what does national policy look like? So if we are a union of states, what would a national policy look like which is actually bringing these states together rather than leaving all of them to their own karma? So I think the issue of North-South, the issue of delimitation, the issue of Finance Commission, without saying anything about what should be, has to be looked at from this lens of equity. And more equity is good for all of us. I think we need to really start from that belief. I'll stop here and be happy to take questions. Thank you.
When we're talking about diversity, we have a model of the European Union where there are, I think, 25, 27 countries which are as diverse as it is in India with different languages, different culture, but they managed to have a single trade bloc. Do you think that over a period of time, that is how we should evolve into? And it should be more decentralization, and centralization is a problem for development. Do you think so?
Not an easy question, but broadly, I would agree that centralization is a problem and we need to move towards greater decentralization. At the same time, I think the stage of development that we are in, because it's not just diversity, it's also inequality that we see. If it is totally decentralized with the center kind of withdrawing from its responsibilities, I think what will happen is that this inequality will increase even more. In the sense of UP and Bihar don't have enough within themselves to get out of the rut that they are in. So decentralization is also something that needs to be done carefully. Yes, more decentralization, but that doesn't mean that all the funds are collected centrally and the spending happens decentral, which is what is happening currently. That the center has control over the funds, but it says implementation is a problem of the states. And you see that the states which are doing better are getting more funds also. If I can give a very simple example, say NREGA, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. It provides employment for those who are not able to get any other employment. And the idea is that it is the poorest who would get more work there. If we look at the per capita spending under NREGA, it's highest in Tamil Nadu and Telangana and Andhra Pradesh compared to Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Is that because the need is more here? No. The spending capacity is more here compared to there. So whatever there is, these people make do with it and do something better. So I think, yes, decentralization as a longer term agenda. But how does the transition happen? Can the center just withdraw? Because there is a baggage that we have to think about how we deal with it as well.
The second question I have is there's a common articulation amongst the middle class that the South and the West are funding UP and Bihar and the poverty there. And that is being unfair to us and they're taking advantage of it. I have a different opinion, but I would like to have your opinion on this.
I have a different opinion too. On all culture issues, I'm South Indian. But this complaint of the South Indians that they're being discriminated against, I think is not valid at all. Firstly, if you just look at Finance Commission grants, I mean, you're being treated badly by the government, I presume. Finance Commission grants till the previous Finance Commission were based on 1971 population. And the population here was actually reducing. So we were getting a larger share. If you look at the per poor person grant coming from the center, the South is still getting more than the North. It's what you look at. There's this other interesting number. So if you look at the credit deposit ratio, which is banks have whatever amount of money that everybody is deposited there and how much of that they're giving out as credit. The credit deposit ratios are above 1 in the southern states and around 0.58 or something in the northern
0.2 in Bihar.
I could argue that the Biharis are saving and we are getting loans from that money. I mean, it is their money that we are taking. And the example that I gave, you look at NREGA, you look at National Health Mission, you look at Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, any central scheme. The southern states are the first to use more than 100% what is allocated to them, which is because governance is better. In UP, you have ambulances, but you don't have drivers to run those ambulances. So if you look at the end of the year, proportion of allotted funds spent, UP would have spent like 60% of its health budget. Tamil Nadu would have spent 100% and put its own money, or Telangana or Andhra. All of this to me says that actually the South has been getting a better share, and now we are also getting cheap labor. I mean, let's accept it. Why are all the security guards from the North? Why are all the, every cook and even serving people I see in restaurants are from Odisha. It's not as only people in Odisha know how to cook, or only people of Bihar know how to guard a school or a home or an apartment building. Obviously, they are cheaper than our labor is. So is that unfair to the South?
North Indian people are getting at the time of voting in general election, assembly or parliament. In South India, I know the highest figure. What about North India?
I don't have a set. The scale is very different. I was part of a kind of observing an election campaign in Delhi in the recent general elections. And there was a Congress team, and this is every party, I happened to be there in a Congress office. There was a Congress team that came from Telangana to kind of help with this campaign. The voting here was done. So they went around the field, they did whatever they did, they came back, and I could speak Telugu, so they were like happy to chat with me. And this guy, this NSUI leader comes and says, Akka, enta kharchu ayi untundi ikkada? I said, I don't know, I am just observing. He said, choose the 12-15 crores ayinattunnai. I said, maybe. He said, ma దగ్గర 50 crores తక్కువ ఏం కాదు. So like, from your campaign, I think maybe 12-15 crores you guys have spent, but at least 50 crores is what we would spend. Nothing can happen with this little thing that you're spending. So if there is any money being distributed much more here than it's there, there's not so much money there to distribute.
Good evening, Ms. Dipa. I have any econometric model to capture unclassified or underreported women agri laborers' productivity since PLFS or NSS failed to do in terms of work participation?
In fact, if I remember correctly, about half of the labor force participation of women that you see in PLFS is in what they call self-employment. About 2/3 of that are what is called unpaid helpers in family enterprises, which is basically women working on their own farms or little shops. And there's also something called the time use data, which... Every woman has 2 acres of land. That's not true. I can't hear you, but if you're saying every woman in Telangana has 2 acres of land, that's not true. Does not have, that's true. I am saying that what you're asking about capturing women's work, that's a whole different issue, and I can do a whole talk on that. But women's work is difficult to capture because a lot of women's work is unpaid. And it's economic work, but it is unpaid work. But by definition, the labor force surveys are supposed to capture that work. What captures it better is something called time use surveys, which do not ask whether you're employed or not, whether you have a job or not, but they just ask for the previous 24 hours what you did every half an hour. There's an issue there, we can talk about it later.
Into the mic, sir.
It was a brilliant lecture, and the exposition was fantastic. As a teacher myself, I feel that. Now, I would like to take you back to middle class, as he suggested. You know, there is a general feeling here, in South, mostly in Telangana and Andhra, that the middle class has given up. In the sense that they are not bothered how a state is governed, because they are happy, they are getting there. And they are looking at only about my flat, my children's education, my job, my career. This is general feeling. But is this also something which is helping in human development? In the sense that there are certain people who are concentrating on their family, how the children are going up, whether this is something which is happening everywhere, which is happening in others, because generally there is a feeling that middle class has turned inwards. It is not, they brought independence, because the higher classes were not interested, lower classes did not matter. See, middle class, which brought you independence, which brought you all these things, today, is there a problem that they are turning inwards?
One part of it you're saying that whether the middle class is turning inward or outward, they're investing in themselves and their children, and that is a good thing, of course. I would also like to add that even the poor are investing in themselves and their children. You know, all these 1 lakh loans that these women are taking, you ask them, what is it for? Everybody is saying it's for their children's education. They are taking rooms on rent, they are going to Narayana, Chaitanya, anybody who can do a little bit, they're trying to do. Everyone wants better for their children. But is it enough to want better for your own child alone without being concerned about what is happening around you? And I do think that the levels of empathy have, I don't know if they've gone down, but I can say they're very low. Because in my lifetime, I've not seen much greater empathy even before. It's always been sort of low. Just want to add that when we say middle class, we think of people like us. We are not middle class in this country. We are in the top 10% of the income bracket, or maybe even higher, some of us. The average kind of income is around 18,000 rupees a month. In Delhi, there was this, the person who was working in our university in the office, the admin staff, who is an outsourced agency staff, was earning 20,000 rupees a month. And he was very happy because this was the best he could get. This is a qualified, educated person doing admissions and keeping records and so on in the university. So that's where we are. So I think this sort of inward looking or hoping that each one of us will do the best for us and things will get better is probably will not work.
Dismissal of Kerala and its development model. What exactly is, specifically so not replicable about it?
Replicable, but one thing about Kerala is that the change started happening much earlier, because of which it seems like it's more difficult to replicate because there's a lot of social reform involved even before independence happened. And this whole thing of Kerala as a matrilineal society, I think, is a bit overdone. Actually, women's status in Kerala is quite pathetic. Domestic violence is very high. Currently, dowry rates are have gone above the roof in Kerala, and so on. But this investment in education is something they did, and across caste class. It was not only education of the upper caste or upper class, or only of men. They closed the gender gap in education way back. I think all of this did contribute. But right now, the distance is so much that it feels like it won't happen. And Kerala has its own issues, like I was trying to talk about in the end. There's issue of employment being generated there. People there are not willing to work at all for the wages available. So a lot of dependence on migrants coming in. People in Kerala, everybody is going out now. No one is staying there. So that's also something to look at. So it's not like there is a blueprint there that we can take and apply here, because they did many things right, but they've also facing consequences of some things they didn't get right.
Position on the disparities was quite clear in your analysis. See, Amartya Sen had said some time back about how democratic societies don't have famines, right? I mean, there's some famous statement. And there is some evidence that he brings about China and post-independence India and so on. If you look at politics today and state of democracy across the country, one thing that seems to be a great leveler across the ideological spectrum, across states, is the high level of intolerance for free expression, free speech, for dissidents and dissent that cuts across the entire spectrum, from Kerala to West Bengal to Telangana and so on. So if that is an important aspect of democracy, and you mentioned democratic governance as an important factor, that doesn't seem to matter. In one of the more intolerant regimes for the last 10 years of dissidents and dissent in Telangana, Telangana seemed to have done quite well. And all the indicators that you mentioned. Same thing you can say of some other equally intolerant states. So all that it takes is a tweet from somebody to drag them to jail. But despite that, we seem to be doing well. So what is the relationship between political democracy and economic development?
Eligible to answer the question fully. One, I still believe that, firstly, I think democracy is a value in itself. And therefore, I wouldn't want to push this question too much. Because let's say that you do this empirical exercise and show that the lesser the democracy, more the development. For me, development encompasses democracy. So can you call it development at all? Would be the first thing I would say. The second is that I think also that democracy doesn't automatically, and we have seen that, electoral democracy, not like democracy in the true sense, but electoral democracy doesn't automatically deliver development for all. That's also something that we've experienced. This reverse that we now seem to be experiencing, which is that despite lesser democracy, development is happening. I think it's an open question. And like, for example, I'll give you one example that I've heard about China, where they say that you can say nothing about the Communist Party of China. You cannot question the regime. You cannot say that we should have free and fair elections and there should be multi-party. But you can say my school is not working. That my local CCP fellow is corrupt and remove him, I want somebody else because I'm not getting my agriculture subsidy. And in fact, they actually encourage it. these local kind of complaint giving and responding to it. I'm not saying that's a desirable model, but I'm saying somewhere for certain things, even the most autocratic regimes seem to understand that you have to create a feeling of, I'm being heard. I think that's what is happening today in India. This is just a hypothesis that I have, because some of us here might be saying, oh, there is no space and there's repression and we're not able to talk and we are scared. I am scared. I'm to say certain things and not say others. But when I go into the village, they're not scared. I think they're in distress because they're all indebted. I don't know where they're going. They think they're doing very well. They have phones. You know, I'm again like building a caricature here, but broadly, I don't know we are all in sync in this country as well. So that's why also I think it's very difficult to answer that question. But to get out of this sort of a regime, can we do it with this low level of development without talking about people's capabilities? I think that is very difficult. I mean, without doing education, without improving any capabilities, can we get out of this rut? Probably not. It's probably because we've not done all that. People find different kinds of agenda more attractive because there is some agenda they're being given. I don't know. I know it doesn't answer your question, but just
because last few months back, when all of us read about this multidimensional poverty index or something, this stuff, we are so contented with the results that we have lifted more than 27 crores population from poverty, etc. Like, what popped in my mind for this question is, do we really think that poverty means giving that roti, kapda, makan for them, so that whenever they got from that line above, and we'll call them as they are not poor. And I think they're just occupying the houses or the facilities which were left by the people which they already enjoyed. And this is because the bare minimum that economy could trickle down is this development. And we are still calling that as the yardstick of development, and we are really happy with it. So what can be the better new definition or color of the development which we can make as a new yardstick so that the next policymakers could start working on this?
I think again, topic for expanding capabilities is much beyond anything that we are measuring today. Of course, that definition is difficult to put into measurement. So I'll just say that when we say, should we have a different definition of development, it's also a question of, should we as society have a different concept of development? What do we think? Do we have different standards for the poor and different standards for ourselves? I think finally that's what kind of creates the basis for these measurements also. No? Beyond that, I can go into the current poverty line. What are the problems with the multidimensional poverty? It will take a lot of time. Many people have written, I've also written, which you can look at. But there are issues with data. There is issues with what is truth in the data and so on. But definitely what we understand as development is also not just what's written in the textbook or what is in the Niti Aayog policy paper, but what's in all our minds, I think, because that shapes politics as well.
60s invested in human development, and the economic returns only materialized in the 80s and the 90s. And this seems to have a longer time horizon, which is much longer than the 5-year electoral cycle. So how do states and the center maintain any continuity in such large investment projects?
Advocates or argues for investments in, say, early childcare. You'll see the returns in 30 years, and the party in power doesn't know if they're going to be there 30 years later. So how does that remain an agenda? From whatever little I've studied of Tamil Nadu, I feel it remains an agenda if it remains a political agenda. And how it remains a political agenda is through everything else that I discussed. So certain things, which again seem small, but they do have multiplier effects, are things like midday meal, you know, the rations under PDS, the school uniforms. These are things where now it is set there that whatever you do, you cannot withdraw certain things. You can only improve upon them. I mean, however corrupt you are, whatever your ideology is, you moved away from your ideology, you have to say something about the midday meal. It's a small program, but it has many multiplier effects. So they started with saying, they first said midday meal in schools. Then they said midday meal in all schools. Then they said 1 egg a day. The next party came and said 2 eggs a week. The third came and said 3 eggs a week. The latest was they're giving them eggs 6 days a week. The children are bored with boiled eggs. So now this government has a menu where they get egg biryani one day and fried egg one day and tomato egg one day. But what is the pressure that every election they need to say something about the egg in school? Right? Or they did midday meal up to class 10, now they're saying, okay, we'll give you breakfast. This might seem like a dole. It's not really. What is that political imperative that, no, kuch bhi kar lo, you have to say something about this? How do we achieve that? I don't know fully, but I think that is what keeps it going.
Do you think that all the states today, what they are earning and what they are spending, that we are living beyond our means?
This question comes up not just by the quantities, but what you're giving or what you're doing. So spending on setting up schools and hospitals is not equal to spending on giving every woman 2,500 rupees a month. I think we need to make that difference. There's some spending which I think even if it's beyond means is worth it because it will pay you back later. States can afford to have deficits. We have rules about how much deficit they can have. They can sometimes go over. It depends on the economic cycle and so on. So it's not a straightforward question of how much deficit is okay. It's also what you're spending on and what returns that will give. So definitely I am not really for these Ladki Behna, Dhanalakshmi, Grihalakshmi because I fear that that is finally going to take money away from the school and the hospital and the social welfare hostel and so on. Those are worth investing in.
There's also a problem in accounting. Actually, when in classical accounting, when you spend on the salary of a teacher, it is expense, but when you have a building, it's an asset. So, and the way it is being articulated is that this is an expenditure and this is a waste. Anyway, that's one. Anyway, I think we are done. Before we wind up, I just wanted to tell you one small nugget of information on who wanted war with Pakistan and why we are a diverse nation. There are two classes of people who wanted war with Pakistan. One are the South Indians who are not affected by the war, and two are the TV news anchors.